It's safe to say that Life Before Man is one of the less known of Margaret Atwood's works. On Goodreads, Life Before Man has about 6,500 ratings. In contrast, A Handmaid's Tale has 1.5 million. Even Lady Oracle, the book before this in this series on Margaret Atwood, has double the amount of ratings. So what's the deal? Is this a hidden gem waiting to be discovered in Atwood's back catalogue, or a blunder in her long and varied career? Life Before Man tells us the story of Nate and Elizabeth, a married couple, and Lasher, the woman whose life becomes intertwined with theirs. Nate and Elizabeth's marriage is under some strain at the start of the novel, it's safe to say. The two have recently ended long-standing romantic affairs that the other partner was fully in knowledge of. In Elizabeth's case, her lover Christopher committed suicide after she refused to leave her husband and kids for him. The two work together at a museum along with Lasher, a paleontologist living an uneventful, boring life. Lasher, the descendant of Lithuanian Jewish and Ukrainian grandparents, seems more interested in the world of dinosaurs than the world of people. She has rather endearing fantasies in which she walks around with the dinosaurs that are kind of a holdover from her childhood, deciding that thinking about these dinosaurs is way more rewarding than thinking about men. One day she gets a call from Nate, someone who she hasn't really interacted with all that much up until that point. He asks to meet her for lunch. To her surprise, she ends up going. She envisions him proposing some kind of romantic rendezvous. Instead, she asks her to show his kids around some old bones on a Saturday. You know, classic lunchtime stuff. What can you say to that other than yes, I guess? Meanwhile, Elizabeth has kind of been hearing some voices in her head. The doctors tell her there's nothing to worry about though. We get glimpses into her childhood in which she was abandoned by her mother and raised by her cruel Aunt Muriel, who she kind of considers responsible for her mother's death. Her sister drowned in a bathtub following a breakdown in a church service, responding to a minister preaching about revelations. Lasher's background is also explored, specifically her time growing up with her two grandmothers, both of whom hated each other and their influence on their grandchild's upbringing. In the background, there are also elections in which the Parti Québécois is kind of making an effort to separate from the rest of Canada. Nate is all for this. His mother had pushed him to be a political activist throughout his life and was very disappointed that he ended up as a toy maker. Nate and Lasher kind of continue building towards an affair. They have a night in a hotel, which kind of confuses Lasher when Nate makes no more move on her than a kiss. We see in his perspective that he was afraid to make a move on her, but he didn't want to hurt her and let her into his life. Nate also says that he'll call her after, but the first call ends up being from Elizabeth, who invites Lasher to dinner. She feels deeply uncomfortable about dinner, finding herself unable to join in on the Canadian cultural jokes, and feeling like Elizabeth is intentionally displaying her hold over a man that she no longer has any interest in as kind of a power play against her. In a game in which each character has to kind of display their usefulness in surviving on a desert island, Lasher kind of says, well, I could identify all the bones that are there, and ends up getting upset and runs off to the bathroom and locks herself in. Another time, the two finally consummate their relationship, but Lasher is distraught to find out that it's in Elizabeth's bed. Yikes. Elizabeth toys with seducing Lasher's boyfriend, William. Following a date with Elizabeth, William sexually assaults Lasher and kind of plays it off as like it's no big deal. Lasher moves out and starts formally living a life as Nate's mistress. It's an incredibly lonely life, waiting for him to end his marriage, which he seems a bit reluctant to do. He begins an act of attrition, kind of trying to annoy Elizabeth enough that she will choose to leave him on her own terms. She's eventually forced to call his bluff and make him leave. Aunt Muriel visits Elizabeth and tries to get her to use any means available to her to get Nate to move back in. Elizabeth throws a bowl at her. The two eventually divorce and Aunt Muriel passes away in the hospital, Elizabeth holding her hand, not quite forgiving her, but at least giving her some comfort as she went. She finally understands that Muriel had been providing financial support to her mother up to her death. The novel ends in an ambiguous place for all our characters. Nate is trying to collect signatures for a kind of petition against the Mounties, living up to his mother's dreams at last. Lasher, having intentionally not taken birth control without Nate's knowledge, is kind of building up to telling him that she might or might not be pregnant. Elizabeth ends up feeling not lonely, but single, alone. And she's moved to tears by a piece of Chinese propaganda art displaying tulips and innocent rose at the foot of Mount Chungman. China does not exist, she says. Nevertheless, she longs to be there. Right, onto the analysis. Atwood once said the following quote in relation to Life Before Man. Depression or pessimism are relative to what you think is really out there in the world. If you think the world is Disneyland, my book is depressing. If you think it's Buchenwald, it's Anne of Green Gables. I think I'm a realist. I give many more rays of hope than people deserve. Buchenwald is a Nazi concentration camp near Weimar, for context. Potentially iffy pronunciation. I think that this quote is illuminating in a number of ways. Firstly, it displays the central darkness at the heart of this narrative. This is not a pleasant story, but an ambiguous one that kind of fits in with Atwood's more jaded worldview. If you find this book depressing, Atwood says, it's because you have a more rosy view of life than her target audience. Given the lower readership for this novel, personally, I'm not sure that she quite got the balance right. I didn't really gel with the novel myself. So whilst I will go into different themes here, it's very possible that there are things that I've missed. And if there's something about this novel that you really loved that I didn't mention, please let me know, because I'd be really interested to hear it. Right from the beginning, we can tell this is not going to be a light read. Elizabeth's initial chapter, the first of the novel, starts with an angry message to her lover who has recently committed suicide. Whereas Nate starts with an almost whining complaint that his wife isn't giving him enough credit for all the support that he's doing for her in this troubling time. Like, he cooked her a meal, dude. Come on, give him some credit. Lasher, too, is not in the best place. She's kind of vibing in a relationship with a man that is easy but lacks passion and is more fixed on her work than anything else. Indeed, a key theme of the novel and the characters is tied into Lasher's work. The theme of fossilization. The two main characters have been trapped in a stalemate for a decade now, tied in an unhappy situation that both are pretending is satisfactory. The two go through a kind of cycle of repetition in the novel. Elizabeth previously had lunches with Martha, the woman that Nate had an affair with prior to Lasher. She continues to attempt to use the same method when dealing with Lasher. At dinner, when she emphasises her long history with Nate in order to kind of express the continuity, and also later when she meets her in her office and kind of tries to hammer out the terms for how they're going to live their new life. It's a clear power play. Nate, likewise, realises he's going through much the same patterns with his previous relationships and constantly prioritises his children and stability over Lasher in the novel. The characters have lost their ability to communicate over the years. Elizabeth in one scene fears she's going deaf. Nate's response to that is that there are just some things that she doesn't want to hear. Ooh, burn. And yet there is a necessary counterpoint to fossilization in this novel. Extinction. Nate and Elizabeth are stuck in a downward spiral, it becomes clear. Both are using the techniques that they've employed in their previous relationships, but are finding that this time it doesn't seem to be working. Nate seems terrified that because of his decisions, his relationship might actually finally end, but he feels completely powerless to stop it. And Elizabeth is tired after Christopher's death and increasingly unsure as to whether it's even worth it to keep fighting. We get glimpses of this on nights like Halloween, where Elizabeth is sat at home distressed, but Nate is out running, unable to stop. Lasher too has been fossilised prior to the start of this novel. She's been trapped in her dream world, this life before man, if you will, and longs desperately to experience things that will have an irreversible effect on her life. This is why she's drawn to Nate and the change that he offers her, and also explains her frustration in his slowness at starting the affair. All the characters are also deeply impacted by their past in the novel, inheritance being a key theme. Lasher's ancestry is filled with conflict, not only with her Lithuanian Jewish grandparent and Ukrainian grandparents each fleeing their own conflicts, but also in their clashes with each other. Her Ukrainian grandmother gives her the present of a decorated egg. Her Jewish grandmother stomps on it on the floor and breaks it apart. This just adds to her feelings of rootedlessness, along with her feelings that she doesn't quite fit into Canadian society. Elizabeth's own background, in which 3 of the people in her life have likely committed suicide, kind of adds to her defensiveness in the novel and the boundaries that she sets up. Nate's failure, on the other hand, to live up to his mother's childhood expectations leaves him bouncing around aimlessly. It's only when he finds out his mother might not have been as perfect as he once thought that he's able to let some of that pressure go from his life. One thing that is interesting about the novel is its title. When you read the words life before man, you think of the dinosaurs, right? You think of a time before humanity existed. You think of the way in which these characters are kind of constrained by their past. And yet, as Carol Beran has pointed out, that's not the only way you can read that title. You can change the emphasis to life before man, the life that's ahead of humanity. In this sense, I would argue that 2 of the main characters in the novel, Elizabeth and Lasher, kind of represent the different possible futures that man can have before himself, each in a certain way displaying the positive spin that Atwood is trying to put on this desolate and depressing story. Lasher, although doing so in a controversial way, has chosen to reclaim her agency, creating life, creating that potential future before her. She's chosen a future, one with Nate, rooted in the traditional family values. Elizabeth, meanwhile, is finally able to picture a future for herself that's divorced from the trappings of marital life, and also divorced from the trappings of her childhood. One in which she'll raise her children alone, crying at a painting in which different people are coming together to create a collective future. As Beran says, for Elizabeth, creating and nurturing are the values through which she can see a new life before man. Personally, this wasn't really the Atwood novel for me. I felt that it did lean too heavily on the bleak side of things. I really struggled to find an interesting or new approach to a novel that I feel like I've read a million times before. It doesn't surprise me that this appears to be Atwood's least read novel. Do you agree with me? Did you find it a slog? Or were you captivated by the groundbreaking original story of a man, a middle-aged man, having an affair with one of his wife's younger colleagues? Let me know what you think below, and also remember to subscribe. We've got more Margaret Atwood coming up. Feel free also to let me know if there are any other kinds of videos that you'd like to see me make other than these kind of book club style reviews. Always appreciate hearing feedback, and I've been loving reading through the kind of long detailed comments that people have been leaving on my Shigura videos. It feels great to hear all your thoughts, and I've been reading every comment that I've got. Cool, see you next time.